Okay, so for anyone just coming in, there's pizza in the other room, but just so you guys can get set up, we're gonna be, for the starter code this time, we're not doing like the typical like git commands since we had merge conflicts last time and we are using like a lot of the same files, but just modifying them. So if you guys can go to the part 5 branch if you do like ACM URL slash hackstool. Then you should be able to get to our GitHub. And I can also just link it quickly on the slide, but if you go to the part 5 branch, you'll be able to see we have all the starter code here, but we don't want to get merged to avoid the merge conflicts. So just copy manually in all the files you need into your VS Code. Let me just really quickly just link the branch, the slides. Okay. And then just so you guys know, the slides link is right here. It's acmurl.com/hackschool FA24-5. So I'll let you guys set up at least with the slides, and then you can go and manually copy the starter code files. Hopefully everyone has the slides for now, but it should be the same format as the previous slides if you don't remember, or you can always just like ask someone in your table. But just so you guys, the mic ran out. Okay. And then for half 4, can you help out anyone with setup? I'm gonna switch the mic.
Wait, it's not working again?
Oh, yeah, this one I switched out the battery, but it's still not working. Okay, now we have switched again to this mic. Okay, but once you have all the files copied, your VS Code directory file should look like this. So just to point out the folders that you should copy, so you should copy all the files in those specific folders. So server/modules. So basically all of the sub-modules, like activity model and food model. And then for the controller, you can copy the activity controller or trip controller. And then for client, you should copy the trip card. So everything is index.css is now .css. And then the activity module, so also the index.js and the sound module.css. We're having the same call as Kevin.
I think the Zoom died. Oh, wait, no, maybe it did not die. I'm tripping. Wait, did it die?
I'm in Zoom.
Oh, okay, because like I wanted this. Maybe that's not.
Oh, maybe it's because I hit a lot of stuff.
Okay.
Cause
Like,
I
'cause I didn't see the stream recording thing. I thought that. Okay.
hide this again. Can you raise your hand if you're done with setup? Why are all the mics working? Oh no, you have also done it. Okay. Hopefully, okay, I think this has battery. So can you raise your hand if you're done with the set? Never mind. One of these, please. Okay. We try again. So can you raise your hand if you're done with the setup code? I think that's the majority. There'll still be helpers walking around for anyone who still needs to finish up, but as long as your code has all of these files. So the main ones we'll be using are just the trip controller and then the trip model. And then the activity ones are just like bonus activities. Just because if we can't cover all of it, we don't want to we want to just focus on getting the basics out. And then for the second part, we just need you to work on the trip card. And then we also have instructions for the CSS for this. So those are like the main files you have to worry about. Okay, so we can just get started now. So we're just gonna do a quick icebreaker. So question of the day, let me just hide the Zoom. What's the best meal you've had at a UCSD dining hall and which dining hall was it? So you can just talk to your tables. I'm pretty sure most of you are first, second, or like transfers, or if you're not, you've been to the dining hall at least once. So just discuss in your groups and then we'll have you guys share out some of your answers later.
You want them to share? You want them to share?
Yeah. Okay, I think that's, okay, I think that's good for the icebreaker activity. So we can all quiet down. We can now just do a little share out on people's best meals. We just pick a random table. That table over there. What's the best meal? Or one person? Yeah. Okay, 6 college. Any particular dining hall? Okay, rooftop. Okay. About a table in the middle, or like over there. Wait, pizza? Which one? Oh, scholars. Okay, yeah, I'm from Marshall. You will get sick of the pizza eventually if you live there. But yeah, I think that's good. I think my personal opinion, I think 6 college is the best, but that's my opinion. Okay, so just to go over the timeline, if everyone can quiet down, quiet down. Okay, so just to cover the remaining hack school timeline, so we're on the second to last workshop now, which is just setting up your database with MongoDB. So this is how we can actually like create our trips and store them somewhere instead of like just like locally storing it. And then our last workshop is where we're going to connect everything and actually deploy your website so you can access it just like through a website instead of just like local hosts. Okay, so I'll just pass it on to Nathan now to talk about databases.
Okay, so the first part of this workshop, we're going to be going over databases. So what is a database? Databases are structured to store and persist information, kind of like the name suggests. It organizes information in a logical way, as you can see from the little picture below. In the context of our hack travel journal, databases can help save our journal entries for our existing and planned trips and also activities. Okay, so since now we kind of know what databases are, let's go over the two different databases. So the two different databases storage methods are SQL and NoSQL. So SQL stands for Structured Query Language and is a relational database, and it uses tables to store information. So it's kind of like the picture from the previous slide. So that's kind of what SQL looks like. NoSQL, on the other hand, is a non-relational database. So instead of using a table to store the info, it stores the data in documents. So it uses key value pairs and columns to store the data. So we'll see that in the next. So the database we're going to be using in Hack School is MongoDB. It's a NoSQL database, and the data is stored in collections of documents, and it's stored in key value pairs. We're using MongoDB because it easily queries our data for us, and it's just easier to understand for beginners compared to SQL. Okay, so here's kind of like the structure of a MongoDB database. So inside of the database, we have collections, right? So the collections are just a bunch of documents. And inside of the documents is kind of the model, which has features and the key value pairs. So yeah, this is the general outline of what the MongoDB structure looks like. So now I'm going to be setting up MongoDB. So first off, we're going to be going to this link right here to set up our account. So if everyone can pull that up right now. Okay, once you're here, you can use whatever login method you want, but here I'm just going to use Google. I'm gonna give everyone like 2 minutes to set up their account, and then I'll ask people if they're done or not. Okay, so hopefully everyone has their account set up. Now we're gonna create our first new project. So here we're gonna do new project. And then here we can name our project. I'll just name it Hack School. Something like that. And then now we're gonna press next. And then you're gonna be the project owner, so just create your project. Okay, now you should see this screen, and we're gonna create our cluster. So press create. And then here, you're just gonna select the free one. And then you just keep this as cluster 0. And then these preset options are good. Now we press create deployment. Okay, here we're gonna be creating the user for our database. So the username, just name it something you'll remember, or it doesn't really matter what you name it. But it might already have autofilled. But for the password, you're gonna want to remember this because we're gonna need this later on. So create a password that you're gonna remember, or just copy this one. And then we're gonna create the database user. Oh, before that, since I already did it before, it has my IP address whitelisted, but if this is your first time, you're gonna should see an option here to add your IP address. So just do that. Otherwise, you won't have access to the database. Okay, so we're gonna create our user. And then now we're gonna do choose a connection method. We're gonna press drivers. And then here, Node.js and then 5.5 relator is good. And then just wait here, there'll be a URL in a bit. That'll load up. If it doesn't load up, just exit out of it and open it up again. It should pop up. Okay, raise your hand if you have the URL showing up now. For the other people, is it still loading? Okay. We'll give it like 2 more minutes. Wow. Could everyone raise their hand again if the URL is showing up now? Okay, I think we should be able to move on now. If it's not working, just have someone come over and take a look, but it should work soon. So now that you have the URL, we're gonna copy it. And then you're gonna go to your env file. And then here, you're just gonna paste it in, or so you should write db underscore URL equals, and then paste in the URL you just copied. And then here, there should be a field where it says password, and instead of password, the password should be like, yeah. So in the field where it's like this, carrots and the password, just delete that and paste in the password you had. Okay, so hopefully everyone has that. So now let's just briefly talk about Mongoose. So Mongoose is a object data modeling library for MongoDB. Basically allows us to structure our database in a more uniform way. So because MongoDB doesn't really have a structure, so the way you store the database is not like it's not you don't there's no one set way to do it. So by using Mongoose, it allows us to have more code that's readable and easier to reuse, and it's easier to manage and query our data. And then Mongoose does this by having schemas, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Okay, or not the next slide, after we do this. Okay, so now we're going to cd into our server, and then we're going to run npm install mongoose. Okay, let's come back together. All right, so everyone should have installed mongoose, and we just did this. So now we need to go to our server config file. So we're gonna go to server config, this file right here. And then if you don't have this already, you're gonna need this db underscore URL colon process dot env dot db-url. This allows us to access the URL we put into our environment file. I was searching with the company. Huh?
Or like, if they, oh, like, they
Yeah, they
don't
don't,
copy that.
yeah. And then
That's the rule.
this,
Yeah, I think it's part of it.
I don't think so. Because. Okay, hopefully everyone put us in. Now we're going to go to routes. So previously we added these routes in part 4 hack school, but we're just going to comment them out for now because we put in new code that doesn't run yet because we haven't filled it out yet. And this is also but it was using pre-filled in data, which we're not going to be using anymore since we have MongoDB to put in our data. So just comment this out for now. Because they did, it wasn't working. I tried it. It was like error. Oh, because I don't think. Yeah, because like the starter code, I think it's like.
Wait, tell them remove the get trippy.
Oh, really?
I think that's the only thing that would make it error. Put the add the base probably.
Okay. Or instead of commenting out the whole thing, you can just remove the one that says get trip name. And then later we're gonna add the host one for our trip here. Now, after you do that, you can, when you're inside of your server folder, you can do npm run dev. And then if everything works successfully, you should see this. Oh, there's one more thing we should add. Inside of server.js and server, add
Just tell them, just go to the side.
add this into server.js.
And when?
Could you raise your hand if you have a message where it says connected to MongoDB? Okay, thank you. Could you guys raise your hands if you guys need help? Okay, so hopefully everyone has it working. Okay, so now let's talk about schemas. So what is a schema? Schemas are like blueprints for the structure our data is going to take. And so schemas basically define the shape of our documents that go into our MongoDB database. An example of a schema would be something like this picture on the right. And then, so basically each schema defines one model, and inside of the model, there's like features. And then inside of the features, it would be a key value pair. And then for more info, you can go to this link right here. So now let's just define our trip schema. So what do you guys think would need to be inside of our trip schema? Okay, destination. Okay, and what type do you think that would be? String? Okay.
Basically the stuff we put into our get trip, like.
Yeah, yeah.
Those.
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah, you guys are absolutely correct. So then here is what our trip schema would look like. As you said, destination would be a string, the journal entry would be a string, and then the start date and end dates would be the date type. Okay, now since we did that mini activity, you're going to go write your own trip schema inside of our trip model.js file. All right, and then if you need help with documentation, you can go here. And then just in case you guys finish early, there's also the bonus activity, which is writing the activity schema, which can be found inside of the activity model.js.
I'm assuming whatever we have. Right, so. Oh, that's the end. We are calling. So you like it's still no. Why it's the go down okay. It's
Should I put the activity solutions here? Oh.
I have it open. Isn't that Excel?
Oh, okay. Should we put with the bonus activity too or no?
I think for activity mode, you can just say it's like very similar, except you can just like say the one part like, well, you use escape laptop object.
Oh.
And you can just say like, oh, this is just a way you can like, it's like a cool thing and all where you can reference two different schemas basically. It very much is.
I'm scared of even standing too close, babe.
Could I get a show of hands of who's finished with the trip activity? Could you raise your hand if you guys need any help?
Okay, can you guys raise your hand again if you're done with the trip activity? Yeah, we'll give it only 2 more minutes since we're just gonna show the solution and then you guys can copy it down if you're still stuck on something.
Okay, can everyone quiet down, please? I'm gonna go over the solutions for this activity. Okay, so inside of our trip models file, can everyone quiet down, please? Thank you. So here inside of the schema, we're just gonna define kind of what we talked about in our slide. So as you can see here. And then in order to create our model, we're gonna call mongoose.model on trips and our trip schema. And to export it, we just export trips. And then for the bonus activity model.jx is pretty similar. Everything here looks around the same. The only thing that's different is here we can set the type to be mongoose.schema.types object ID here where we're referencing the trips in our activity. So we can, because each activity references a trip. So by doing this, we can have a relation between the activity and the trip it's referencing. Okay, now I'm gonna pass it over to Angela to talk about database operations.
Just pause the music. Okay. Okay, so hopefully everyone got a chance to at least look at the trip model and the schema and the activity model. So how do we actually like create a new trip or read a new trip or get all the trips from our databases? Because right now we just built out the structure for what a trip should look like, what all our trips should look like, but how do we actually interact with our database? So there's a very common thing in backend engineering called CRUD. So that's create, read, update, and delete. So these are all the operations you can do to a database. So create's pretty self-explanatory. You're able to like create a new trip, for example, and then read, you're able to get data from the database. So if you already have trips that you created in your database, read just allows you to pull all the trips. And there's also like, you can just pull one trip if you have the ID of the trip. And there's a lot of different ways you can just like get data from the database. And then there's update. So update is like when you want to change something. So let's say like, we're not going to implement in our app, but if you want to take the project further and have people able to edit their journal entry or the dates for their trips and things like that, you would have to implement update operations. And then delete's pretty also self-explanatory. If you're like, oh, I want users to be able to delete their trips, they're like, oh, I don't want to keep this in my website anymore, then you're able to create delete operations, so then that wipes the data from the database. So in this project, we're only going to be covering create and read, but feel free to try implementing, updating, and deleting on your own time, just so you can learn more about all these CRUD operations. So first, I'll just be going over create. So here, as mentioned before, MongoDB is a document-oriented database, so we're able to store data in documents that are very similar to JSON, so all like the little brackets and the key pair notation. And here is just a code example for how you can create a new document in your database. So here, you can see we import the trip model schema, so this makes it so that we have to have our new trip conform to all the types and parameters we set in our trip model, like destination, start date, journal entry. So you can see here, I just wanted to mix it up a bit because this is just like example code. But here in this example, we have a new trip and we set it as just a constant, and then we also just use bracket notation and all of the different parameters. So we have destination, which is the same as our trip schema. Then I also wanted to just show that you can have different types here. So then here you have days of your trip and you set it to a number. And then the last step is you would use the trip schema to create your new trip. So trip.create is just the final step to how you would actually create your trip into using Mongoose. And then here is how we do a read operation. So there's a lot of different things you can do here, but again, you have to first just import the trips model schema. And then if you want to just get all the trips, you just set a constant all trips. And then we're doing, oh wait, because when we do trips offline, you're calling into the database, so that's an asynchronous function. You want to wait until this completes, and all this code will be in a asynchronous function, even though it's not shown. But you'll see it later on when you're implementing it in your own code. So that's why you use wait, and it simply just waits until this trips offline completes. And when it completes, it will return all the trips are in your database. And then something else you can do, which you won't be doing for the activity, but just for curiosity's sake, you can do most recent trips. So this finds the 3 most recent trips based on each filter. So here you can just see we get all the trips, but then we sort them by the end date. So this sorts it, I think the sending, so then you're able to get the most recent trips in your database. And then you can just leave it so that it only grabs 3 entries from your database. And then this is what I mentioned before. It's very helpful to be able to just get one single trip in a website. Sometimes if you want to select a specific trip and show it to the user. So here, the ID is just a mail ID, but you would grab the ID from the object ID from your MongoDB database. So if you notice when you went to MongoDB, you'll notice later when you create a document, it automatically creates an object ID for it. And then this is how you're able to narrow down all the trips in the database and find it specifically by that one ID. And all the IDs are unique for each entry in the database, so that's why you're able to do away trips, find that ID, and execute just runs this command. Okay, so and here for our first activity, we're just going to be modifying the controllers. So in the slides it should have been controller, but you also have to do the API routes for that. So in here in trip controller, this is where you're mainly going to do the activity. So you'll be doing the get trip. So you have to do a read operation for this one. And then right here, you'll be making a create operation. So that's the activity for this time. You're already making some third code for making the dates, since in JavaScript they do something, or Mongoose they do something differently where you have to basically cast it to a date. And then this is just setting, in case like your trip doesn't have an end date yet, like it's a current trip, it just sets it to null for now. And then these are just like some conditions, so like restriction and like after, or it should be like before the start date. But that's pretty much it. So you guys can just get started on the activity and fill this out. So if anyone's like confused about the posting trips, I would recommend you look back at the part 4 solution code. Since as you recall from the part 4 workshop, we hard coded a lot of things, but actually for the post activity we're able to, you can get stuff from the body of your request. So this is what happens when someone puts in data for their request, and then you're able to pull specific variables out from it. So you can get like the destination for this, for activity, you get the activity spot, rating, and review. But for trips, of course, you get like destination and like journal entry, start date, and date. And then again, this is how like you would test like for the errors. And then remember to always return something in your response. So you can do like red dot status .json, and then you can return the response like that. Feel free to also just search up documentation. There's a lot of good resources on how to work with like MongoDB and Express. And we'll talk about the solutions in a bit, but just like give your best try, and then we have people walking around also to help out.
I think I don't say anything. Sorry, that ruined my whole day.
Okay, it's wrong.
Yeah, I think so. These are the bonus. There are a lot of fun.
Okay, so I think we've given you enough time to at least attempt the activity. So I just want to show you guys how to do it now. So let's just start off with the controller. Make this bigger. Okay, so I think the easiest one was constant get trip. So here we create a trip by doing the await trips.find that you saw on the slides. So I kind of just gave you guys that one since it's easier, but I think the other element that you had to kind of remember from the Express workshop, which is why I said it was really helpful to just go back to the part 4 solutions, is you're gonna have to do res.status200.json trip. And that basically just makes sure that when you call this function in your route, you're able to get back the trips. So this is basically getting all the trips. And then here you're just like turning it into a JSON object and then returning it for the user and then attaches status 200 since that's basically just means it was accepted and correct. And then this is the one that I think a lot of people struggled with, which again, there was a lot of combination between the Express workshop where you have to remember like the JavaScript part, where here you have to do object destructuring, where you get the request.body, and then you're taking the 4 parameters that we set. So destination, start date, end date, and journal entry. And then this is where you were supposed to check if the required properties were missing. So for that, it's just destination, start date, and journal entry. Since as we mentioned before, end date can be null, since you could be posting when your trip's still going on. And then you would just return status 400 since that's the error code. And then you can just say like invalid request for the JSON. But this isn't too important if you just want like to have no validation for your code. It'll still work regardless as long as you add a correct entry. And then we gave you this part since it's just like creating the date, as I mentioned before, and then like returning the error if it's before the start date. And here is the part that was from the slides. So here you can see you're creating from the trips model schema from the request.body. So here we just destructured it so we can do the conditioning, but you can just pass in request.body to like pass in the whole JSON dictionary that you would have passed in Postman or however you wanted to call your API route. And then you also just do res.status200.json, and then you would just return your new trip, just so when you like check on Postman, you can see like it was a successful request. And then just remember, I should be here already for you, like module.export get trip. Remember to always export your routes. And then the other thing you had to do was you had to go into routes and you had to add your post route. So you already had the get routes set up from the part 4 workshop, but you had to add router.post/trip and then trip controller.posttrip since that's what we called our function here. I just paused. Okay, and then that should be all, and then now you can go back to your terminal, and then you can just for sanity, you can just npm run dev, so it saved all your changes. And then it should connect to your MongoDB database, and then this is when you can go into Postman. So I already have it pulled up here. But you go here, and then you can see the GET request should be your localhost. And then it should be 50/50 since that's the port that we set it in the environment file. And then you do /API since we mounted all our APIs into that. And then you do /trip since that's what we defined in the routes file. And then for the GET request, you don't have to put any parameters or anything since you're just getting everything from the database. So once you send this request, it should return. If you don't have anything, because you have to kind of do the post request to do the GET request. So, but I can show you guys the post request, and then hopefully it should show up in your GET requests. But you should see all the trips in your database, and then you can also go back to MongoDB, and then you're able to see all of your collections, which is basically your database entries. And then for the post request, it's pretty similar, except in your body, you have to add your parameters like last time in the Express workshop. But this time, instead of just like going into nowhere, it's actually going into your MongoDB database. So here, I just added destination, start date. It's just like, I just formatted the same way that the computer was formatting since I was just copying it from the MongoDB database. And then the end date is same as the date, so it's formatted in like, I think UTC time. And then the journal entry is just like a random string. And then once you send the request, it should come back as 200, and then you can see it automatically added an ID from MongoDB, like I mentioned before, it's a unique ID for your entry. And then if you go back to your database here, you should be able to reload and see it pop up. Yeah, I think. Sometimes it takes a little bit to show up, but it should show up in your MongoDB database. Or is it showing up for you guys in your database? Because if it's a 200 response, it should show up. I can't see the entry that I just put.
It really takes a little bit. You want to go look at it again?
I think it was on the next page. Oh, okay. Oh, it's just because there was too many entries. I was like, where did it go? But you have to click next. Hopefully you guys didn't make that many entries already. But yeah, you can see here, I just like did the post request twice already. So that's why it shows up twice. Can you raise your hand if you're having any trouble with the post request or Postman or the MongoDB? I just added in Discord the same object I use, so it's easier for you guys, because I think the date's a little finicky. So you can just use that for Postman and then add it to the body here.
It is. It's like.
I think some of you, if you're running into the 404 error, just make sure you export your model schema, since I think that, like, if you're not using the schema, it's just basically like not able to get it. And then the 404 is most likely like you're like not like putting it, well, it's like getting the right parameters, but then it doesn't know that's the right parameter because you haven't exported your schema. I can just like briefly pause at like all the files. Usually if there's an error somewhere, it's most likely if you're getting like MongoDB errors, then that's probably has to do with your server.js, like any like connection errors or anything. But otherwise, you should be concentrating on finding the error in like your controller. Just like make sure it's like all the same as like my code, or it should be in the model or the routes if anything's off. I think it lasts. It's like 10%. Okay, so I don't think we're gonna have enough time to cover React at the end. We were supposed to just cover a little bit on React to get you guys prepared for the next workshop. But it's pretty much just gonna be more of a deep dive into React, talking about things like prompts, use state, and use effect. So basically adding interactivity to your website with React and connecting your front end to your back end. And right now we're doing Postman requests, but in a website, you wouldn't want to just like keep putting stuff in Postman to make like new trips and stuff. So we'll teach you guys how to like connect your form to make a post request essentially. But I guess since we do have a few more minutes, if you guys did attempt the bonus activity, I just wanted to walk through the solution quickly. So here's just like one implementation that works. So in get activity, so the one thing that you have to change, like the rest is like pretty much the same, like await activities are fine. But to get specifically the destination from your trip, since the main reason why is because we're referencing the trip in our activity, but we don't want like all of the trip information. So you don't want like the trip start date, end date. You just really want just like the trip destination or like the place that you went to. So this populate basically just takes the trip parameter and then it finds the destination parameter within the trip. And then everything else is pretty much the same, like res.status.json. And then for post activity, the main thing is we already gave you this to how to get the trip ID. So when you pass in a string for the object ID, this just creates the object ID object. Since we typed it to in the schema, if you recall for activity model, it should be mongoose.schema.type object ID. So then we have to just cast it from a string to object ID. And then here, very similar, but the only thing is when you create the activity, you're just storing the trip ID in trip, and then you can pass in all the rest of the parameters as is. And then everything else is just res.status.json new activity, and then everything should already be exported for you. Okay, I'll just give a few more minutes for you guys to copy it down. Again, this part is just like for error checking, but it's not completely necessary if you just want to create the post route. Oh, do you have a question for doing? Oh, okay. So everything should be the same in the routes since you already created a get activity and post activity from last time. And then when you want to just test it out, I would say you kind of have to do a little bit more work for this since you have to go back to MongoDB and get a specific trip ID. But it's essentially the same for like the GET requests. And then you would just change the URL to /activity. And then you can do the GET. And then you're able to get all the activities. So I only post it once, since again, it's very tedious to get the trip ID from MongoDB. But you can see here, this ID is specifically for this activity. So that's the unique ID for this activity. And then here you can get the trips, but you can see you just get the unique identifier for the trip, and you also get the destination. So this is the thing we'll be pulling for our front end. And then everything else is pretty standard. It's like a string. And then again, with posts, I don't have it pulled up the thing, but you would have to basically just take the ID from MongoDB for your trips. So if you go here, you basically have to copy this string and then just add it, in here. And then you just do trip, and then you do all the other parameters as it's like a string, and then you should be able to just like post it. And then it should just do the same thing as like the post request for where it just like returns it back to you in here. So that's pretty much it for this workshop. So before you guys go, we also just have the feedback form for you so we can improve for next time. So I know next workshop is the last workshop, but we want to just make sure everything's good. And yeah, so we'll see you guys for our last workshop next week.